Go live.
Here we are. Got it.
My God.
The option to leave the meeting, but I won't.
Setting up meeting for YouTube Live. Do it.
Hey.
Okay, let me close out the. Are you still there?
I'm here. I'm still here.
Can't find you. Okay, there you are.
Here we are. So split screen?
Yes, I think we're live.
Okay, perfect.
Hey, hi everyone. Hi, Jen. Hi. Okay, this is Annalisa Durr with Journey to the Goddess TV. Welcome back to another haphazard YouTube Live. Today, I am so excited to have a friend and colleague, Dr. Jan Peppler, on, and we're going to talk about the archetype of home. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. So we're going to dive in. I'm going to start with your bio to give everybody a little bit of more of a context for who you are. Okay. So Jan Peppler spends her days exploring the connection between people and places. She received her BA with a focus in Sacred Mythologies from DePaul University and a Masters and Ph.D. in Mythological Studies and Depth Psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California. Her dissertation, titled The Psychology of Home, an Archetypal Study of Relationship to Place, explores home through the place. Okay, let me start that part over again. Her dissertation, titled The Psychology of Home, an Archetypal Study of Relationship to Place, explores home through place attachment theory and various schools of psychology, and uses literature, film, myth, and other popular references to illustrate her findings. In 2020, she spent 4 months in Italy during the country's COVID-19 lockdown. During this time, she developed a blog dedicated to her home research and her experiences in Italy. That blog, Jan Peppler Home, is now a weekly newsletter called Finding Home on Substack.com. Additionally, Dr. Peppler is currently working on a book that examines the archetype of home and the necessity of leaving home in order to find home. As a former therapist and teacher, she continues to consult and present with a special focus on the hero's journey, women's empowerment, and of course, home. Woohoo! You know what I didn't put into our kind of pre-planned questionnaires is any questions about your time in Italy. So I hope if there's time or if it feels natural, we can go into that as well. So I invited Jen here today because I have, for the last couple of years, really kind of intently been doing a lot of inner work around this concept of home. And part of it is, yes, looking for my home where I want to live, where I just feel like I thrive and just, excel in life through the geographical location. But also, as I feel like I've been having kind of some otherworldly guidance on home, like the womb as home, especially our mother's womb as our first home, but also like as women, we have wombs. So what does it mean to have womb inside your body or home inside your body? And then of course, everybody has a body. Body is home. Another person is home, or animals is home. And then kind of like for me, what might be the ultimate home, which is like the home of our soul, of the place in which we all originate, and how often more and more sometimes I'm like, I just want to go home to wherever that is, that loving place, because it is hard here. And of course the ancestral home, which I think I will actually get into more detail later. So that's following Jan's journey and story has kind of helped propel me on a deeper inquiry into this world. And so that's why I'm so excited to have you here to talk to you about it, to go through some of the questions, and to hopefully get some clarity for me and help others to get clarity.
I hope so.
Yeah, definitely they will. So what I'd like to start with is if you could give us tell us your story and how home kind of became this really important, meaningful theme for you.
Well, I think you and I have some parallel tracks in some ways, from what I know about you. I have moved around a lot. I have actually, as an adult, moved all of my belongings 23 times, and I have lived in 10 different towns. As a child, I was born in Michigan, in a very small town in Michigan, but then I really grew up in Chicago, and then would go back to Michigan and spend my summers there. And at 18, I moved to San Francisco for the first time, and I thought that was it. I loved San Francisco, found my tribe, found my city. It was amazing. That's where I became an adult. Then I went to San Diego to go to school, went back to San Francisco, and I ended up back in Chicago, which I would never have done of my own volition, with the exception that my father was dying. And so home with my family is. So I went home to take care of my father, and ended up staying for 8 years because I did work that was the most valuable, important work I feel like I've ever done in my life, working with people with HIV and AIDS. And I got married and I stayed. And then life happens, and I was single again, and it was time to move again. So went back to San Francisco again, ended up in Los Angeles, and finally I ended up in rural Idaho. And it's a county of only 21,000 people. Within a couple of years, I had bought a home in a town of 65 people. Just the locals who counted and said that's how many people were there. And I was surrounded by mountains and cows, and I loved my home. So even when I was going to Santa Barbara for graduate work, everybody would say, aren't you glad you moved to Santa Barbara? And I'd say, I didn't move here. I have a home, and you've never seen it. It's gorgeous. I felt like I was more having an affair with Santa Barbara. That's how much I'd personified my own home in Idaho. And yet, during my graduate work, I just instinctively knew I was going to have to leave my home, which was devastating. And I kept hoping that that wasn't true. But if that was going to be true, I needed to understand why that place felt so perfect to me. I needed to understand why it is I felt I had to leave. And I needed to understand how I could find home again somewhere else if I was going to have to leave that. And what I discovered while I was exploring these questions and talking to people is how many other people have the same questions, feel the same way.
Right.
They want to know, where is home? How do I decide where to live? So there you go. So now it's all my life's work is just focusing on home.
Awesome. Yeah. I think you're right. I think that it is probably, especially in today's age, like such a common question for people. And I can't remember if I mentioned this to you the other day on the phone, but I was doing a meditation on this theme of home. And I got this answer that like, home is the road for you. It's travel. That's where you find home. And I was like, no, but I want something more stable. Nah.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point. Thank you for mentioning that, because when this question comes up most often, because we most often in our lives associate home, take home for granted, because we associate home with family, with where we grew up, with where our parents are. Or if we then go away, go to college, we marry, whatever, it's then where we have established home and raised our own family. But what happens when that home goes away? When the home that you grew up in no longer exists, when your parents are no longer around, or because of divorce or death or any kind of tragedy, our sense of home is disrupted. And then most often than not, we are alone when we are considering this question. I also see it come up. People also often come to me when they are in a new couple, they're in a new coupling as adults. So not when we're young and we get married, but when we have already been adults and established our own homes and lived our own lives, and then midlife, we come together, or later in life with another person, and we both have our own sense of home. How do we decide where home is together? That's a big question. So you really have to understand what home means to each person, and what are those elements that must be present in order for both parties to feel comfortable. But more often than not, this is a solitary journey. This is, and there's that freedom in that you can wander, you can make all the decisions yourself. But it also requires really, really understanding what are those elements that are particular to you independently, because we all understand when we say, oh, it feels like home, we both know what that feeling is. Everybody knows what that feeling is, but what feels like home to me is not the same that feels like home to you.
Right.
So, but what is it that is universal to you, to me, to everyone, that we need to understand before then we can look at our individual preferences? So
awesome. So this questionnaire that these series of questions that you pose to people in workshops that we're going to get to in a few minutes, is that kind of the frame that you use, the universalizing frame, to help people get to their own?
it's the first set of questions. So these are the most obvious questions. These are the macro questions that begin to look at the archetype of home. And so I want to circle back to that. But first, I just want to say that these questions I ask everybody, even in casual conversation, complete strangers, when they talk about home. I'll throw out some of these questions. If you really want to, if you're making a big life decision, then we need to go deeper. We need to go into the more micro questions about your life at this moment in time and other factors that are important. But today we're going to start with the bigger questions.
Got it.
Those bigger questions revolve around archetype, the archetype of home. Because again, every time people talk about home, it's always from this personalized experience, but what are the same things that we're all saying? And I expect that your viewers and listeners understand a little bit about what archetype is, but essentially it's a set of characteristics that we all agree on, define something across time and across cultures. So with home, what are those things? We're all looking for, when we talk about home, it's a roof over our heads, a place where all our needs are met, where we're fed, where we have a bed, where we're physically sustained. It's a place that's safe and comfortable, very safe, right?
Yep.
It's a place where we feel comfortable, where we can be exactly who we are without being judged, where we feel loved, and where we belong, right? That's, no matter how you describe it, it always comes down to those same things. Interestingly, that coincides perfectly with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in all the literature, this is not something that I saw when I was doing my research. I read so many books on home, from psychology to sociological studies, and a lot of memoir, all saying the same thing and giving tremendous good information. But nobody corresponded those aspects, how the similarities that we all have, to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this, for those of you that don't remember, now it probably rings a bell. Probably saw this at some time in your life, right? So on the bottom level is physiological needs, followed by safety, security, a safe home, love and belonging, that we belong, and then finally esteem. And the idea is, Maslow never made this into a pyramid, but he did believe that the ability to attain the next one was predicated on the ability to have the ones at the bottom. And this, I have to say, is really true in Western culture. It's not necessarily true in other cultures, however. At the very top of the pinnacle is what he called self-actualization. And self-actualization is when we become our best selves and we're able to contribute to the world and be all that we have the potential to be. That can only happen through what Jung calls individuation. And that is where we get to, you have to leave home in order to find home. So there you go.
So two things. One thing that just occurred to me as you held up that image is, you know, in some different traditions, the upward facing triangle is the masculine triangle and the downward is the feminine. And so I was thinking, what would happen if you reversed that? But you kept, maybe like you still kept everything in its block, so that you're going downwards into the chthonic, or, you know, the primal realm to reach self-actualization.
Well, that's beautiful. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it is, that stuff on the bottom is the macro, right?
Right.
And as you come down into the sacred space, into ourselves, is when we get into the micro and the personal, right? But the base of that triangle, or the inverted, it's just the bigger stuff, right? And it all of which leads to the holiest of holies. And so,
wow. And then what would happen if you put them together in there, like, you know, I don't know what that image is called, the Merkaba or the Star of David or something, whatever that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's an interesting image, is the yeah. So I'd also, if you can, just kind of give like a quick description from your perspective, what individuation means for people that may or may not know what that actually means.
So individuation is when we understand ourselves as our own people. And, you know, Jung talked about this. The first time that he felt that was when he was walking through the woods at like age 12. And I think he was on his way to school. He had just left home, and he had this sense of the world, and then suddenly him and his place in it. And he was singular. He was distinct and different from everything else. That is individuation. I firmly believe that we don't fully individuate until we leave home. Now, of course, there are some of us that are required to stay home. A colleague of ours, Jody Bauer, wrote about this really well in Jane Eyre's Sisters. You know, the person that can't go off on an adventure or a hero's journey, and it all happens in the confines of an acre or an estate or one's home, right? But it is then a psychological or metaphorical separation from home. And again, our first home is mom, as you pointed out, and then it's family. So at some point we need to break away from what home is to our family, to our moms, to everything that we've learned. So individuation is when we come up with our own ideas, we are able to access our own beliefs, our own preferences, and then and that's a lifelong journey. It gets better and better, but the first aspect of that is having to make a separation and leave home. And I know there are a lot of moms out there that hate me saying that.
I wonder if like the journey, the life journey itself is the journey of coming home. I mean, you know, there is that famous quote by Ram Dass that's like, we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah. I think for me, that actually goes into a whole nother area of believing that we are all on heroes' journeys, if we're conscious of it, and that there's not just one journey in our life, that there are journeys within journeys, but you can look at one's from birth to death as one large hero journey, right? And there are all these circles in between, and they don't have to be circles. Again, as Jody Bauer points out, they can be these wanderings. You even said, maybe home is wandering. It doesn't have to be going back to the same place. It can be a new place, but these are still journeys. And in that new place, we find a new sense of home.
Right.
We individuate more.
And even when you come home to the same place, it's never the same because you've changed, you've had new experiences. That's just a little kind of side note. That's one of the kind of more esoteric aspects that I talk about with the menstrual cycle and the menstrual cycle journey as being a spirocyclic pattern, that even though we're cycling, it's never the same. It's never the same.
I always think of it as the helix, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Or, the spiral. Like, we're always coming back to the same place, but it's not the same place because we've journeyed more. So we're somewhere this way. And as you pointed out, we're not the same. Very often, if we're talking about home being in another person or home being a place that we left, they have changed during our absence.
Right.
Too, right?
Right. That's right. Exactly. I think that's one of my fallacies is, well, when I was younger, I'm finally starting to get it now that I'm not the only one that's changing. Everybody else and everything else is changing and adapting and growing and subtracting too. So let's keep going because I know we could actually just riff on this forever. But we have so many beautiful questions ahead of us. So I think that we've already discussed the purpose of these questions. Yeah. Do you feel, and you would typically ask them, you said sometimes to strangers, like, but these are also questions you would ask in a workshop setting, correct?
Absolutely. Or if somebody came to me just really wanting to, I've had a couple couples come to me and say, we're 50 years old. We love each other. We live in different towns. How are we going to make this work? Yeah. Okay. So I use it in personal consulting as well as larger.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So basically what I encourage everybody that's watching live or not live to grab a pen or a pencil and some paper, grab your computer because you're going to want to follow along and answer these questions for yourself. But also, Jan, can we provide these questions or at least a few of them as a document in the YouTube text box?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, thank you. I've always meant to just put them on my website. So you're pushing me to do that because these, yeah. And I also want to just clarify that typically when I do these in a workshop, I do speak about each concept before I ask the question, why we're talking about this question, and then give people at least 25 minutes to journal and write. So we're going to do this pretty quickly. We've only got a half an hour left. Pretty quickly, but so write them down or I'll
yeah. And to be fair, Jan gave me these in advance so that I would have time to think about it. So let's just, and the other thing I want to give context wise is that just for clarity's sake, is that I'm also in transition. I'm in Tucson. I decided to come to Tucson, see if I wanted to move here during the hottest time of the year. And I have had a thoroughly underworld experience, which I'm so grateful for, actually, so grateful for. But, I am like thoroughly in the transition and not exactly sure what's going to happen next. So that's where you're finding me today as we go through this. I also want to mention that I know that mother goddesses play kind of a factor within this whole kind of matrix. So I'm hoping that they naturally arise in this conversation too, since this is Journey to the Goddess TV.
Yes.
But, it's all the feminine for me. It's all the feminine. Great. So unless you have anything else you'd like to add, I think we should dive in. So
go ahead and ask you the questions.
Yep. I'm going to let you kind of introduce anything you need to, and you can ask the questions. I'll answer, and then we'll just go from there, riff, or you can, whatever feels most natural.
Okay. So the first question is kind of an obvious question. What is home to you? And I'm just, before you answer that, clarify that people, their first response is typically what the culture tells us it is, or it is the new fad. I have a very good friend who's a wonderful architect, and we talk quite a bit about how, oh, people want this in the home or this in the home, and that's just the new latest greatest thing. For me, the idea of the open work floor plan, that was the new thing. Awful, 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 awful. So, when you think of home, what are the sounds, smells that come up? What does the landscape look like? What does the home itself look like, inside out? That kind of thing. So what is home to you?
Yeah, okay, so I think this is really interesting, and this is where the yellow and our shared love of yellow is going to come in. I think because when I first answered this question for myself, it was like, okay, warm, safe, calm, but funny, like my home wasn't always calm. And then I had this memory, one of my earliest childhood memories, of sitting in the living room, and the sun was just beaming in through these glass doors, and I was just having like this oneness experience with the home, or with the sun, and it just felt like so warm and so yellow, and just kind of slightly electrifying. And this is funny because I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I have not that many memories of rain. I have the ones that stand out more are the sunny memories. So, and then, so I'll just say this piece. And then I was looking through my photos today because I was going to try to put some kind of background image behind me that felt home to me. Failed. But I was looking through some photos from when I was in Rome by myself for the first time. I've been to Rome 8 or 9 times, 7 or 8 times, but this was the first time by myself. And it was, one of the things I love the most there is the yellows and the oranges, the yellow color, and how like the last 2 or 3 years I rediscovered yellow, and it's like all I want to wear. So that's the theme that's mostly coming up for me today as I answer that question, is that yellow, vibrant yellow, yummy, warm feeling.
Thank you so much for answering that with such depth, because you gave 2 really clear examples of, while it may not exactly have been your prominent experience of home, sometimes we understand home by what we have lacked, what we have not had, right?
Yeah.
So being in the Pacific Northwest, where it's supposed to be, where it does rain all the time, right? So those few moments, those few times when you were in the sun, the imprints that stay with us, the imprints that become our home imprints that we are always trying to fulfill later again, come from those positive memories. Because the negative ones you don't need, you have no purpose for that, right?
Right,
but
right.
The positive ones, that being in the sunshine, that sense of warmth is so important, that's what's carrying you forward. And I can't remember what the first thing that you said though too was, that maybe it was about chaos in the home.
No, it was the opposite. I did say warm, but I said calm and safe, but right. Even though it wasn't always that way.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, sunshine has that sense of consistency, warmth, everything slows down in the warmth, in the yellow. Whereas if you had other colors, they can be more vibrant and bouncy. So you're really gravitating towards what you didn't have or didn't have enough of.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm having this moment thinking of like, when sun gets gendered to the masculine, or, these father son gods, and my experience of sun as very warm and calming and enlivening at the same time. And then God love my father, very passionate man, but didn't get that experience from him sometimes, but not often.
Right. Well, yeah. I also love that this is your answer, because it emphasizes that, in particular, one of the ways, wherever we find ourselves, if you can't be in the landscape that feels like home, or can't necessarily be around the smells or the language, the sounds, whatever it is, in your case, you can wear what it is.
Right. Right.
Yellow is something that you can carry with you anywhere.
Right.
Mountains you can't carry, right?
Right.
The mountains
Right.
remind you of home, or the beach, but so that's beautiful. That's great. Good.
And the floor, and the last thing I'll say is the floral, the floral smell that of my mother's perfumes and stuff like that.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
good. I love that you have a sensory
Mhm.
memory of it too. Okay. So then you started to answer this thinking about your childhood.
Yeah.
So where did you feel safe in your childhood? Did you play as a child? If so, where? And when was the first time that you remember first playing on your own? So being away from mom, was that exploring in your backyard? Was that when you went off to school? Was that riding your bike around the neighborhood?
Right.
So a little bit about your childhood.
Right. Okay. So these are the pieces that I want to add here, because obviously I could say a lot. So on one hand, I felt extremely safe. Like, my mom is a Cancerian mom. She's very nurturing. She's always created that just really safe mom container for everybody that comes into her orbit. I think my dad did in his own way, but then it also felt chaotic, and scary sometimes. So that's one, but I was playing all the time. I've also been acting since I was 5. So that was encouraged. And I remember like creating plays in our living room and our front yard, and just creating all this stuff and inviting the neighbors. So I was always enrolling my friends in this stuff too, or maybe we were doing co-enrolling each other. Whatever. I was a very playful and curious child, and that was encouraged. So that is great. That's great. I'm just kind of like, okay, yeah, that feels good for me. And then, do you want to interject before I move on to the next set of questions?
Well, I guess I'd want to, because you really prefaced all this with your mom. You called your mom Cancerian.
Yeah.
Right? She was Cancer. Let's talk about your mom.
Okay.
We go on. Okay. So kind of the background to this, you specifically asked about the goddess.
Yes.
And if you're a Westerner at all, like you and I are, the goddess, of course, is manifested in infinite ways. For those of us that are Westerners, it is really through the Greek pantheon that we are most familiar. Even if you didn't study mythology, it shows up in our films and TVs and everything else. That's the goddess as we know it, right? So I know you know about the Greek pantheon. Can you think of how your mother might have manifested the goddess? Which of the goddesses in the Greek pantheon do you think she was most like? You said she was nurturing.
Right.
Does that make her a Demeter, or does that make her a Hestia or an Artemis?
Right. I know. Well, I was thinking the Virgin Mary, but I actually think there's some Virgin Mary, which I know is the Christian tradition, and she's not technically a goddess. But Demeter, definitely Demeter would be the closest, I think. And even that Demeter-Persephone relationship definitely exemplifies my relationship with my mother.
Okay. So if I may, tell me if this is true or not, because specifically since you talk about Demeter Persephone, we tend to elevate the Demeter mother as the ideal mother. She cared so much for her child. When her child left her, she was grieving. She'd go to the ends of the earth for her child. The opposite of that, however, is she never lets her child go.
Right.
Right?
Oh yeah.
So Persephone is not
yeah.
able to become a mother herself or her own individuation until she's either abducted or she leaves on her own, right?
Right. And I think that really actually contextualizes the piece on the environment that I want to share.
Okay, go ahead.
And so the first is this memory that's been coming up a lot lately. My memory of my mom dropping me off at a caretaking facility, probably one of the first times. And that just like, oh, mom, don't go, like that just terror, even though it was in our neighborhood, it was like, just around the block from where we live, but that separation, oh my God. So that's one memory. And then kind of on the opposite end, you asked, and I'm just going to reiterate what you asked, which was, when was the first time in your life that you felt free to explore your environment? Was it as a child on your bike, or was it in college? For me, even though I did a lot of leaving home, college, travel before that, travel after that, it was actually the first time that I traveled by myself without any agenda, not planning. I was not meeting anybody or going with a group. And I didn't have any specific intention other to be there. And that was, I had gone to India with this theater group to train in classical Indian dance. And I decided I wanted to change my itinerary at the end and leave India a week early and go to Rome, my favorite city in the world, by myself. So that memory that I mentioned earlier was that trip. And there was such a homecoming. That was the first time where I felt like I really separated. And and that was the beginning of my solo travels too, where I just started traveling for the joy of traveling for me. And sometimes with an intention, but not with people.
Yeah, that's huge, because not only had you left home, but you had also left this group that you had been traveling with. You, for the first time in your life, made this very conscious decision to be alone, away from everything. And I have to say, the colors of India are very much like the colors of Rome. Rome just of Italy, except they become softened in the sun in Italy,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So that yellow, the oranges, the red, whatever, it's the same kind of thing. So I'm not surprised that color stays with you.
Right.
That's what you were surrounded with the first time you separated from every other known home.
And the interesting thing too that I'm realizing right now is, in that trip to India, that was the first time that I had such a profound, visceral, embodied experience of the goddess, and really began my goddess journey. And then I went to Rome right after that. So there was a little bit of goddess homecoming, or divine feminine homecoming, that kind of ushered me in. It was like I separated from my birth mother in a way, and was now finding my, goddess mother.
Absolutely. And while the goddess is so prominent in Hindu faith and tradition, when you get to Italy, there ain't nothing but the goddess. It's only Mary, right? There's no competitions from other gods around. Jesus is a sub role.
Yeah, compared to the mother.
Mary,
yes,
everywhere. So perfect.
Yeah. Oh, this is really interesting. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah. What I would go into deeper with you another time, we don't have the time now, is to go back and we would look at that relationship with your mother and how it has changed over the years, or how she has changed. And particularly as you're talking about a Demeter Persephone, we would talk about that on another level. But moving on, tell me, did you feel homesick? When was the first time you actually felt homesick? Have you ever felt homesick? So when you were alone, or maybe even right now? You've told me a little of what's going on right now. Talk about your experience with homesickness.
I think,
what were you missing?
If I remember correctly, which is interesting, when I did my study abroad program in Italy, which was also my first time there, I think by the end of that trip, I felt a little homesick. And I had, I was gone for like 5 months or something. I think those really big travels to the first time you travel to a foreign land, not all foreign, but I guess it was the Italy trip was a big one. India was a big one because it takes you so out of of context and really scrambles everything. So those are the two that come to mind right now. Specifically, there's a little bit of I miss my dog. That's what I miss. I miss him.
Yes. 100%. Home is dog for me. Yeah.
Yes. I was in Greece a few years ago. I fell in love with Greece. I think about that often. I think about Italy. So like even my sense of like longing for home, it's constantly revolving to these few handful of places attached to memories, maybe. I'm not sure.
Okay. So it's not you're not missing something from your childhood. Your homesickness relates back to different times at your life in different places that you've been that were transformational in some way.
I think so.
Yeah, that's an important thing to look at.
Yeah. Even Pacifica, where we both went to school, that clearly, I think you said this for yourself as well, felt like a home. And I was like very clear the first day I was there. And so I'm having homesickness with regard to that now, finishing school and being a little untethered.
Right. So there's a lot of different things to touch on there. If we had time, what I would do is walk you through and have you write a lot about what was in each of those places that when you think back on it and feel homesick for it, do you long for the most? So it could be colors, it could be the warmth, it could be, in what you just mentioned in the sense of Santa Barbara and Pacifica, it's a sense of belonging or being part of a group, enclosed, safe, protected. You're part of a gang. This is your tribe. And maybe even part of going to India. You were part of a tribe when you did. And that can easily be, you can hold in the same space. As we know, it's not either or, it is both and. We can hold a lot of contradictory emotions. So you may long for being part of a tribe, as the same way that you long for that independence and that singularity, that knowing yourself as empowered and singular, that you felt when you were in Rome and you felt when you were in Greece, right?
Right.
But if you start to pick it apart and write that down and really identify those different things, then we can start to put those together into a new created photo, new created image, right? With all those different parts. Right. Sometimes it ends up looking like a Picasso.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's Botticelli. Who knows? Maybe they don't always go together like you think they would, but yeah.
I'm excited to try that on my own. Okay, next question.
Well, I think the last one is, again, these are all like the bigger questions.
Right.
But in our culture, we tend to think of home in terms of possessions. In fact, I feel like I've met a lot of people who are discontent with home and think the way to cure that discontent is to buy more things, to redecorate, or buy a bigger and better home, or move to a better location, right? So with that in mind, obviously you can't take a home with you, but if you had to leave where you are, you're in your perfect home and you had to leave, or in your case, if you can only pack so much in a suitcase, what would you take with you? What objects always make you can look at that or carry it with you? And it might be something that you've always had since childhood. or it might be something very recent, but you never really want to be without that.
Well, I'll tell you a real life experience I had, and that was back in 2017 when the Thomas fires happened in Ventura County, and I actually had to leave in the middle of the night and choose what I wanted to bring with me. And I remember opening up my closet and be like, what do I take? I love everything in here. And so in the end, I ended up taking my computer because I was working on my dissertation. Mm-hmm. If I had not been working on my dissertation, I don't know if I would have taken it, which is interesting. But there are photos on there. I took jewelry, my nice jewelry, the stuff that people have given me or that, and I think I remember taking my Mary Magdalene statue, which I bought on Mary Magdalene pilgrimage in France, which is not worth anything really, except for the memory of that time for me. Right. And then some clothes that I needed for that season. But I decided it was so overwhelmed by the choice that I just got really simple. And I was like, what really is the core stuff that I need? And that was it.
Well, when you got back from that, thank goodness none of your stuff was burned down.
Yeah.
Do you think you would have made a different decision if you think back on it now?
Well, it's funny because the fire, when I went back, I'm going to admit this, but I ended up like driving around with some more stuff in my car until the fire was like all the way away from where I was living. Because there was always like a potential chance that it would come back because of how, right? So in a way, yes, I did choose more stuff when I went back and kept it with me all the time, just in case. I think it was some clothes, maybe a few other objects.
I don't know why you wouldn't want to admit it. I think there's no one else in the world that I think everybody would want to do that, right? Okay.
Okay. I feel better. I was like embarrassed about that, but
no. So with just these preliminary questions, what are the things that came up over and over again in our discussion? The wandering, the being able to live with just a few things that are important to you. There's nothing huge. Like you didn't say, I've often said, my books, I want to take my whole library with me. I am only now, for the last 5 years, I've been slowly getting rid of more and more of my library. And it's, been hard. But if I had to choose, I'd be like, my entire library, I can't live without that. So I've been a little more grounded to a place than you. If you can fit everything in a suitcase or in your car, that lends itself to feeling at home on the road. Right. If also the things that remind you of home are not a landscape of open fields or mountains or beach, it's the color yellow. It's sunshine. Again, there's a lot of places you can live.
Right.
Warmth and sunshine. Even a lot of places that have the warmth of colors. So it's not just Italy. You and I both think Italy has the best colors.
Yes.
But there are other places where you can find that sense of history and warmth and the sun encased in the surroundings, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are just some of the things that kind of support what you said at the beginning, which is you're thinking, if I remember this correctly, that you are feeling more and more like, or what was you actually got a message that home is in the wandering.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep. And I was just like,
there's a little to that.
But my stuff, what do I do with my stuff?
So
oh my God.
We would, our next conversation will be about drilling down more. Okay.
Right.
Look at more things to really identify what works, what doesn't. But in this kind of bigger macro, I think already you have indicated enough that supports this message that you received. Does that feel right to you? Does that feel comforting?
It does. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's something that I intuitively know about myself, but there's still that piece of resistance. But I think that that's the next layer, as you're saying, that, I would work through with you or my therapist or whatever, you know.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say in those in those other layers, for people, not a lot of people like you are just wanting that could feel at home wandering. Okay.
Yeah.
So often what happens is people will say, I don't know if I should, I've got a choice between two houses or two offices. I don't know if I should take this one or that one. One way to look at it is in the address of the home, of your apartment, of your office. And so the numerological value and energy can also be very powerful and a clear indication of where you want to live. Now you can look at it, it's real easy just to look at the number of your house, okay, what that number comes out to be and what that energy is. But if you really want to understand it in your life, you have to see it in the greater context of your blueprint, not only your life path, but your personality, your soul urge, and then what stage of life you're in, what number is ruling your current stage of life for 9 years or longer. And then how does the house number or your apartment number correspond, and how do they interact? Because a place may be really right for you 10 years ago, but it's not right now.
That is so cool. Do you work on that too with people? Oops,
yeah, I've actually
sorry.
been doing numerology all the way back since 1998. And so I used to just do blueprints for people when I was a therapist, but now I love teasing into the whole home number, your house number aspect, and layering those on top of each other. So
I love that. Oh my God. Well, okay. So before we go, because we're closing in on time here, and before we give people an opportunity to find out how they can work with you and learn more, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about your blog and your time in Italy, if you want to bring that in to the conversation.
Well, I think because we both love Italy so much, I have to at least mention one thing about that. I had gone to Italy for what was supposed to be 5 weeks in Italy and then a week in Greece. And I was really, really clear that I had to travel when I was traveling. I had an opportunity to go a couple months earlier, then I had an opportunity to go again. And I was like, no, this is exactly when I've got to go. I just knew that. And everybody said, you can't go because Italy's got the highest rate of COVID or coronavirus. I was like, I'm not going north. For some reason, I always knew I was going to go south, despite being a humanities major and I should see Florence. I just wanted to go to Italy and Sicily. So sure enough, 5 days into the trip, the whole country went on lockdown. And I theoretically, the reason for going was working on my book. And I brought a copy of my manuscript with me. And instead I ended up in Sicily in a town I'd never heard of. And I could not leave the house. I was extraordinarily fortunate. You can't say you're stuck when you're in Italy, but I was there for 4 months. 2 of my itineraries, twice, my original ticket got canceled. I never got money on that. And then another itinerary, same thing happened. So it took a lot of time before I could finally create an itinerary to get home. But so fortunate that I had rented last minute. When it goes on lockdown, all my plans have to change. And I found this place looking out over the Tyrrhenian Sea, right? My apartment had a balcony. There was the train line, which really wasn't working. There was the beach, where there was the sea. So I spent 11 weeks looking out at the sea. You could only leave home with a piece of paper in your hand and all that kind of thing. Fantastic, phenomenal. And I'll tell you what, within 7 weeks, I could not wait to get inland. I loved the sea. It's gorgeous, but that's not my imprint. I need to be seeing green and trees and land. So there was my first affirmation of, oh, everything that I've been working on and researching, this makes sense. This is definitely true. Right?
Wow.
Often you complain about looking at water, but ultimately I was like, I don't want to be in front of the water. I want to be in land. So anyway, yeah, I started the blog because people were worried, and then it became this great place to talk about my theories. But as time went on, I recognized the feedback that I kept getting was people want to hear my own story. So I can talk about these theories, but only in the context of my own story. And home, as you pointed out at the very beginning, is more than landscape. It's more than a house. It can be people. It is emotions. It's our belief systems. It's so many things where we find ourselves at home. So Finding Home is my weekly newsletter, Finding Home, substack.com. And you can follow me there, which is fantastic. And again, the topics vary, but they all somehow do seem to converge into the psychology of home. And then you go to janpeppler.com, find me there. I do have a podcast as well, Finding Home. It's on Spotify, Google Podcasts, like 4 other platforms. It's not on Apple Podcasts, but it is on Spotify and some others. So that's Finding Home podcast. And then finally, you can just reach me directly at findinghome@substack.com.
Awesome. And I'll actually put links to everything you mentioned in the YouTube text box to make it super easy for people. Okay. And I'll leave either a copy of the questions in there, or I'll just write them out. Either way, they'll be there. And I just really, you just saw what Jan did with me. Okay. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I really encourage everybody to check out her blog on substack.com. I'm on there reading it all the time and getting new insights. And yeah, I think your work's invaluable, Jan. So I just, again, I'm so pleased that we finally figured out a time to make this work. And I look forward to more conversations and in depth on this subject.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You are welcome.
A delight. Okay.
And thank you everybody at home for being here. If you liked this video, then please, or this conversation, please hit like, please share this video, please leave a comment. I'll pass on comments to Jan, and if she has time to respond, she can. Or you can just go on over to her page and check her out, interact with her blog. Yeah, so just thanks everybody for being here, and we'll see you next time. Ciao.
Ciao.